Hello and welcome to another episode of the Leo Alves podcast. Now, in today's podcast episode, I am going to share yet another short story because if you've been listening for at least a little while now, you'll know that every once in a while, I like to share short stories because it's just something I find interesting. Typically, they will be related to some point in history because I do like history. I wouldn't say to an extreme or very high point, but definitely a lot more than the average person. And of course, this is a health and fitness podcast as well. So again, in this episode, I decided I was going to combine all 3 points and share the story of Pheidippides from ancient Greece. Now, do bear with me, whether you do or don't like history, this does have a health and fitness message that is wrapped up into it by the end. And another cool fact, this is actually where the term marathon came from. So if you know what a marathon is, it's basically a large group of people who will typically have a race over a very long distance. And a marathon is called a marathon because of this very story as well. So in this episode, I'm going to share the story. It's not very long, it's quite short. And then I'm going to reflect on it a little bit by the end of it. And then the podcast episode is going to finish. So this won't be a long episode. But otherwise, let's just get stuck in. So our tale unfolds in 490 BC during the Greco-Persian Wars. Greece was a tapestry of city-states, each with its own culture and pride, yet united against a common enemy, the Persian Empire. The Persian force, vast and formidable, posed a threat to the Greek way of life. And at this critical juncture, the Athenians and their allies faced the Persians at the plains of Marathon, which I was going to say was a city in Greece. It still is today. And it's basically a place that was destined to become a symbol of defiance and valor. So in the midst of all of this, we meet Pheidippides, an Athenian herodrome. And herodromes were basically messengers who were the elite runners of their time, trained to cover vast distances because, of course, in 490 BC, they didn't exactly have FaceTime. So if you wanted to basically get a message from one place to another and it was quite far away, you would typically have a herodrome. Pheidippides was tasked with an urgent mission to seek help from the Spartans. So a journey of over 140 miles, which is about 225 kilometers, was what he had to embark on to go and get help from them. And that's a feat that today would be akin to running about multiple ultra marathons back to back to back to back, because that is a very long distance. So you can imagine Pheidippides, he set off from Athens because, again, this is what they just did. No distance was too far or too long. And his sandals were probably kicking up in the dust of the ancient roads, his path taking him over mountains and valleys, through olive groves and along the coastline, because, again, this was like, where Greece is on the map. So maybe around in the Mediterranean, you can imagine more or less what it might have been like. Again, through the olive trees and by the coastline, day and night, he would be running, driven by a sense of duty and urgency of his message. Upon reaching Sparta, which he eventually did, Pheidippides delivered his plea. But the Spartans were bound by religious laws to not march until the full moon. Undeterred, Pheidippides turned back, and his return journey was just as grueling, of course. But eventually, when he did arrive, he was met with news of victory. The Athenians had triumphed at Marathon, which previously was seen as a seemingly impossible feat. Yet, now there was still no time to rest or to waste. The Persian fleet was also moving towards Athens, and the city needed to be warned. So once again, Pheidippides laced up his sandals for what would become his most famous run. The final sprint from Marathon to Athens, approximately 26 miles, or 42 kilometers, as you could also say. And by the way, this was on top of the 140 miles he had already done, was a race against time. Because, again, he needed to let the people of Athens know that they had won the war in Marathon. So Pheidippides, already exhausted, pushed his body and mind to its limits. And then as he entered Athens, his breath ragged, his body nearing collapse, he delivered his triumphant and final message: "We have won." With that, he fell, his task complete, and he passed away. And the reason why he passed away was because he pushed his body and his mind to such extreme limits. And it was such extreme limits for over such prolonged periods of time in horrible and very extreme conditions. You can imagine it was probably quite hot. It's around the Mediterranean. obviously the roads and the mountains and whatever it might have been, they wouldn't have been the easiest to run on, yet he had to do it non-stop because he obviously felt a massive sense of urgency. He felt what was a massive sense of duty to his nation, and it was basically his job. It was what people depended on him on, and he probably knew that he had maybe thousands and thousands of lives depending on him, so it was his duty to get that done ASAP. And again, he pushed his body and mind so much that he fell and passed away from just doing everything that was basically his duty. And otherwise, that's the story. So Pheidippides' story is more than just an account of physical endurance. It's a narrative of resilience, determination, and the human spirit's capacity to endure against all odds. So as we reflect on this tale, me and you, it's impossible to not draw parallels with our own fitness journeys. And this isn't to say that you have to push yourself anywhere near that much to the point, you're going to pass out and collapse. Of course, that's absolutely unnecessary, and that's not close to what I'm trying to say here. Especially, we are on our health and fitness journey just to become a healthier version of ourselves, to improve our quality of life, to feel better about ourselves, to be stronger, to gain some more muscle, to maybe lose a little bit of body fat as well. But what I'm trying to say and where the parallels come from is it's about setting seemingly impossible goals, you could even say, and pushing through those barriers to achieve them. So whatever it might be, maybe you feel like you have a goal and you feel like, oh, that goal is impossible to get there. I've tried so many times, I can't do it. I can never get to that X amount of strength that I have in my mind, or lose an X amount of weight that I want to achieve because, I've just tried several times before and it never goes well and I can't do this, and I'm in this vicious cycle of trying and stopping and trying and stopping and trying and stopping. What I'm trying to say is this story is about the mental battle as much as the physical one. So most importantly, it's about understanding that your limits are often far beyond what you might perceive them to be. Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. If you will, do please drop a follow on whichever platform you listen to this on. Take care and have a lovely day. That wraps it up for another episode of the Leo Alves podcast. I do hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. If you did, then please do consider sharing it with your friends, family, group chat, or even anyone else who could be interested in listening to that episode. Otherwise, if you haven't already, then please do leave a 5-star review on whichever platform you are listening to this on. And remember, all the relevant links, such as the inquiry form to potentially become a Kairos Online member, my social media handles, a free fat loss guide, and a free workout plan are all also found in the show notes of this podcast episode as well. Otherwise, take care and I'll see you around.